She was told she wasn't good enough to play a single minute in Indiana. 3 months later, she dropped 19 points in one quarter for a different team, and the silence from the Fever locker room says everything. If you think NBA and WNBA front offices always make basketball decisions for basketball reasons, this video is going to change your mind. Because what happened to this young forward wasn't about her talent. It wasn't about her defense. It was about a front office that punished a rookie for having the audacity to want more than $700 a week. Stick around, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why one of her own former teammates couldn't hide how she really felt on camera, and why that reaction is the biggest tell of the entire story. Welcome back to WNBA Analysis, the channel that breaks down what's really happening behind the headlines in women's basketball. If this is your first time here, you're about to see why so many of you keep coming back. Let's start with the moment that gave this whole story away. Sophie Cunningham was asked about her former teammate getting a fresh opportunity with the Las Vegas Aces. Watch her face while she answers. This isn't the polite, media-trained response athletes give when a former teammate signs somewhere else. This is real. This is relief. Cunningham wasn't just happy for someone she used to play with, she was relieved that this player had finally landed somewhere that would actually use her. And that's the key detail almost everyone missed. Cunningham specifically talked about being proud to see her really embraced by a new team. That phrase wasn't an accident. Sophie Cunningham isn't someone who carefully picks safe, neutral words to avoid controversy. She says what she thinks, even when it gets her in trouble. So when she goes out of her way to highlight being embraced elsewhere, she's telling you, without saying it directly, exactly how things were back in Indiana. Let's lay out the facts, because the numbers tell the real story here. This forward was drafted by the Indiana Fever with every reasonable expectation that she'd compete for a roster spot. She stands 6'4" with a 7-foot wingspan, and she can genuinely shoot the basketball. In today's WNBA, that exact profile, a long, athletic, floor-spacing forward, is one of the most valuable things a team can find. Every front office in the league is hunting for players who fit that description. Here's where it gets frustrating. When an injury hit the Fever's frontcourt early in the season, the team had 3 separate opportunities to activate her from the practice squad. 3 games where Indiana chose to play with only 11 active players instead of a full 12, shorthanded, on purpose, rather than give her a shot. That decision alone cost her roughly $18,000 in game checks. $18,000 she never got the chance to earn, because a front office had already decided she wasn't part of the plan. Now, some of you are probably thinking, that's just a basketball decision. Coaches make roster calls all the time, right? Fair point. But here's the detail that breaks that argument completely. Later in the season, when a different veteran went down with injury, the Fever suddenly had no problem activating a body from outside the roster. They brought someone else up instead, insisting she was a better fit. Every other time the team needed a warm body, though? Silence. The truth is simple. Indiana had already locked in their 12 players before training camp even started. Nothing this rookie did in practice was ever going to change that decision. And that's the part that should really bother you as a fan. Because everyone around this player, her teammates, the coaching staff, even people watching practice, could see how well she fit in. This was never a locker room problem. This was never a chemistry issue. Her teammates liked her. You could see it in how they interacted with her, in the bench celebrations, in the way they supported her on social media before she ever left the organization. The players wanted her to succeed. It was the front office that never gave her a real chance. And that creates a very specific, very corrosive kind of demoralization inside a locker room. Professional athletes can accept losing a competition. They can accept that a teammate simply played better and earned a spot fair and square. What they cannot accept, what eats away at trust, is never being given a real opportunity to compete in the first place. And every single player on that roster knew that's exactly what had happened here. Now let's talk about the excuse the front office actually used, because this is where their whole justification falls apart. The narrative pushed publicly was defense. She wasn't ready defensively, they said. Couldn't guard anyone at this level, they said. Not WNBA caliber on that end of the floor, they said. Except, and this is the part that should make you furious, every single player on that Fever roster has real defensive limitations. The team's star point guard struggles to stay in front of quicker guards. Their leading scorer is undersized and gets exploited on switches. One of their wings has clear effort but limited lateral quickness. Even the player widely praised as their best interior defender is realistically just above average, not some lockdown defensive player of the year caliber stopper. Multiple rotation players get lost in defensive schemes on a regular basis. So why was this one rookie held to a completely different standard? Why was her defensive growth treated as impossible while every other player on the roster got the benefit of patience, coaching, and development time? And here's the part that should really embarrass the coaching staff. If you have a defensive-minded system and you genuinely cannot figure out how to develop a 6'4" athlete with a 7-foot wingspan into even an adequate team defender, that's not a player problem. That's a coaching failure. Think about what they had to work with: elite length, real athleticism, legitimate shooting range. That is exactly the physical profile that modern defensive systems are built around. You can teach positioning. You can teach rotations. You can teach help side awareness. What you absolutely cannot teach is being 6'4" with a massive wingspan and legitimate three-point range. She already had the unteachable part. The organization simply never bothered to develop the rest. Now let's talk about the silence, because it's just as telling as anything said out loud. When this player made her long-awaited debut for her new team, there wasn't a single show of support from her former Fever teammates on social media. No congratulations. No "so happy for her" post. Nothing. Which is strange, because when a player typically leaves a franchise, you usually see at least some kind of gesture. A thank you post to the organization that drafted them, a "grateful for my time there" message, the standard professional courtesy. None of that happened here. And it's hard to believe that's a coincidence. Because here's what actually happened behind the scenes once you piece it all together. She walked into training camp fighting for a roster spot like every other rookie. The coaches knew it. Her teammates knew it. Everyone understood the final roster wasn't guaranteed. But somewhere in that process she realized something crushing: she never actually had a real chance. The front office had already committed real money to bring in a veteran guard from overseas, and when the roster math came down to it, they chose to keep that veteran active and stash the rookie on a development contract instead. Practicing with the team. Never seeing the floor in a real game. Development contracts exist for a reason. They're supposed to give young players room to grow inside a professional environment. But that's not how this was used. It became roster purgatory. A place to keep her rights locked up while having zero actual intention of ever activating her. And everyone around her could see it. This wasn't development. This was storage. Then it got worse. Even when the Fever had clear opportunities to activate her and get her some real game checks, they passed. Even when they were playing short-handed and needed the depth, they passed. It's hard not to read that as the front office holding onto her rights almost like a warning to other teams. We still own her, don't even think about it, until Las Vegas finally called their bluff and signed her away outright. The Aces did what more than a dozen other front offices were apparently too cautious to do. They looked at an athletic 6'4" shooter sitting and used on a rival's bench and said simply, "You're clearly not using her, so we will." And in her very first real minutes with her new team, she dropped 19 points in a single quarter. 19 points, from a player her old organization insisted wasn't ready for WNBA minutes. Let's zoom out for a second, because this situation says something much bigger about how that front office operates, and it's not flattering. First, think about what this does to their reputation with future draft picks. Every college player evaluating where they want their career to start is watching situations like this one. And the lesson is brutal. Show up here, and even if you have the tools, even if your teammates love you, even if the coaching staff has the tools to develop you, ambition might get you buried instead of rewarded. That's an incredibly hard reputation to shake in a league where every roster only has 12 spots. Second, think about what it does to player development philosophy inside the building. You had a player with elite physical tools and legitimate shooting range, and instead of building her into a rotation piece, the organization let her scrimmage against starters in practice and then told her, essentially, "Not yet," over and over again, with no real plan to ever change that answer. That's not development. That sends a message to every young player on that roster. Working on your weaknesses doesn't matter if the front office already made up its mind about you before training camp began. Third, and this is the part that should bother fans the most, think about the money. $18,000 is not a small number, especially for a player earning close to league minimum. That's a serious chunk of a young athlete's annual income, taken away from her not because of poor performance, but because a front office would rather play short-handed than admit they might need her. Every teammate on that roster watched that decision happen in real time. That's the kind of thing that quietly destroys trust between players and management, and it's exactly the kind of thing that makes good players start looking for the exit. Fourth, think about what this means for the coaching staff's authority. If the head coach genuinely believed this player couldn't help the team, that raises real questions about her ability to develop athletic, high-upside talent. But if the coaching staff actually wanted to use her and the front office overruled that basketball judgment, That's an even bigger red flag. An organizational dysfunction that doesn't just go away after one season. And finally, look at the contrast between the two franchises involved. One organization looked at a 6'4" shooter with a 7-foot wingspan and saw a problem not worth solving. The other organization looked at the exact same player and saw floor spacing, matchup problems for opponents, and immediate offensive upside. One team worried endlessly about defensive limitations that, frankly, existed all over their own roster. The other team figured they could simply scheme around a weakness while maximizing a genuine strength. The results speak for themselves. 19 points in a single quarter, in her very first real chance to show what she could do, and it didn't happen because she suddenly leveled up overnight. It happened because someone finally gave her the opportunity her old team refused to. Look, stories like this are exactly why this channel exists. Because behind every stat line, every roster cut, every quiet front office decision, there's a real person fighting for a career, fighting to be seen, fighting for a chance that a lot of teams simply weren't willing to give her. And it's easy for that story to just disappear. Buried under bigger headlines, forgotten in a season full of noise. We don't want that to happen. Not on this channel. If this video meant something to you, if it made you a little angrier, a little more hopeful, a little more invested in a player you maybe didn't know much about 20 minutes ago, that's exactly why we do this. We tell the stories the mainstream coverage skips over. We give credit where credit is actually due. And we do it because you keep showing up for it. So if you're still here, do one small thing for us, hit subscribe. Not because the channel needs a number to go up, but because every single subscriber tells us there's still an audience out there that cares about the real stories in this league, not just the highlight reels. It genuinely keeps this channel alive, and it means more players like her get their moment told the right way. Thank you for watching. This has been WNBA Analysis, and we'll see you in the next one.